Rose Zimmerman stared at the reflection of a stranger in her wedding dress. The weight of the silk and lace nothing compared to the burden of the contract she just signed with her signature and her future. Montana Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman without means, and at 22 she had run out of both options and time. "You look beautiful, Rose," her mother whispered, adjusting the simple veil. "Alderman Patterson is a good match. He'll provide for you, provide." As if that was all a marriage should be. Rose's throat tightened as she nodded, unwilling to upset her mother further. The family farm had failed after her father's death last winter, the bank threatening foreclosure unless the outstanding loans were paid. George Patterson, the 50-year-old town alderman of Silver Reef, Utah Territory, had offered a solution: marriage to Rose in exchange for settling their debts. "It's time," her mother said, her own eyes reflecting the same resigned acceptance that had haunted their home since the arrangement was made. The small church was sparsely populated, a few town officials, George's business associates, and Rose's mother in the front pew. No friends, no celebration. Just a transaction being completed with the proper witnesses. George Patterson stood at the altar, his gray hair slicked back, expensive suit marking him as one of the wealthiest men in Silver Reef. His thin smile never reached his eyes as Rose walked toward him, each step feeling like she was sinking deeper into quicksand. The ceremony passed in a blur. Rose spoke her vows mechanically, feeling the cold metal of the ring slide onto her finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, George placed a perfunctory kiss on her cheek. Not her lips, never her lips. "Mrs. Patterson," he said formally as they turned to face their small audience, "welcome to your new life." Rose knew then that while she had saved her mother from poverty, she had sold herself into a different kind of prison. The Patterson house stood on the hill overlooking Silver Reef, a testament to the silver mining wealth that had built the town. 3 stories of brick and wood with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the sunset. It should have been beautiful. To Rose, it felt like a mausoleum. "Your quarters are upstairs, second door on the right," George informed her as the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, took Rose's small trunk. "Mine are at the opposite end of the hall. You'll find everything you need. I have business associates arriving for dinner at 7. Please be presentable." With that, he retreated to his study, leaving Rose standing in the cavernous entryway. Mrs. Winters, a thin woman with kind eyes, gave Rose a sympathetic look. "Come along, Mrs. Patterson. I'll show you to your room." The quarters were larger than the entire cabin Rose had shared with her mother, with a 4-poster bed, writing desk, and private bathroom. A wardrobe stood open, already filled with dresses Rose had never seen before, all in subdued colors, all modest and matronly despite her youth. "Mr. Patterson had these commissioned for you," Mrs. Winters explained. "He's very particular about appearances." "I see," Rose said quietly, running her fingers over the expensive fabric. "And where is my mother now?" Mr. Patterson arranged for her to stay in the guest house at the edge of his property. "It's quite comfortable. At least there was that. Her mother would be taken care of, as promised." The price seemed steeper by the hour. Dinner that night established the pattern of Rose's new existence. She sat silently at the end of the table while George discussed mining interests, railroad investments, and town politics with his associates. She poured coffee, smiled demurely when addressed, and retreated when the cigars came out. As weeks passed, Rose learned her role well. She was an ornament displayed at social functions, expected to manage the household staff and present the perfect image of a devoted wife. George never touched her beyond offering his arm in public. They slept in separate rooms, lived separate lives under one roof, and spoke primarily about household matters and social obligations. The hollow ache of loneliness grew within her. She wrote letters to her mother, filled with careful half-truths about her contentment. She tended the garden behind the house, finding some small peace among the roses and wildflowers. She read books from George's extensive library, the one freedom he readily granted her. "An educated wife reflects well on a man," he had told her, though he never asked what she read or thought about the volumes she selected. It was on a warm June morning, 3 months into her marriage, when everything changed. Rose had ridden into town, one of her few independent activities, to select fabrics for new curtains in the dining room. As she left the mercantile, her arms full of parcels, she collided with a solid wall of a man. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her as her packages tumbled to the boardwalk. "I'm so sorry, madam," a deep voice said. "Wasn't watching where I was going." Rose looked up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn cowboy hat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His clothes were dusty from the trail, marking him as someone just arrived in town. "It's quite all right," she managed, pulling herself together. "I couldn't see over these packages myself." He crouched down, gathering her scattered parcels. "Let me help you with these." "Seems like a lot for one person to carry." "Thank you, Mr. Keller, Samuel Keller." He straightened, arms now full of her packages. "Friends call me Sam, and you are—" "Rose Patterson," she replied, noticing how his smile dimmed slightly at the Patterson part. "Ah, the alderman's wife." "I've heard about you." Something in his tone made her curious. "You're new to Silver Reef, just arrived yesterday, bought the old Jenkins ranch outside town, planning to raise horses." He shifted the packages. "Where can I carry these for you, Mrs. Patterson?" "My carriage is just down the street," she said, oddly reluctant to end the conversation, the first real conversation she'd had in months that wasn't about household matters or town gossip. They walked side by side, Sam matching his long stride to hers. "Jenkins Ranch needs a lot of work," she commented, knowing the property had been abandoned for nearly 2 years. "The drought hit it hard." Sam looked surprised. "You know the place? I grew up not far from there. My father was friends with old Mr. Jenkins." She didn't add that her father had died trying to keep their own farm alive during the same drought that had driven Jenkins to sell. "Well, I'd welcome any insights you might have about the property," Sam said as they reached her carriage. "I'm still learning the lay of the land." He loaded her packages into the back of the carriage, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His touch was warm, calloused, the hand of a working man, so different from George's smooth, soft palms. "Thank you, Mr. Keller." "Sam," he corrected with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And I hope to see you around, Mrs. Patterson." As Rose drove home, she found herself smiling for the first time in months, the brief encounter having brightened her day in a way she couldn't quite explain. She didn't realize then how profoundly that chance meeting would alter the course of her carefully arranged life. The following Sunday, Rose sat beside George in their usual pew at church, listening to Reverend Miller's sermon about duty and sacrifice. Her gaze drifted across the congregation and landed on a familiar figure near the back, Sam Keller, his hat on his knee, dark hair combed back from his forehead. As if feeling her eyes on him, he glanced up, meeting her gaze with a small nod of recognition. Rose quickly looked away, feeling an unexpected heat rise to her cheeks. After the service, as congregants gathered on the church steps, George was immediately surrounded by business associates discussing a new mining venture. Rose stood slightly apart, exchanging pleasantries with the other wives when Sam approached. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, tipping his hat. "Good to see you again." "Mr. Keller," she replied formally, aware of curious glances from the women nearby. "I trust you're settling in well." "Getting there. Had some trouble with the well pump yesterday. Don't suppose your husband might know someone who could take a look at it?" Before she could answer, George appeared at her side, his hand coming to rest possessively on her elbow. "George," Rose said, maintaining her composure, "this is Mr. Keller. He's purchased the Jenkins property." George's assessment was swift and dismissive. "The failed ranch, ambitious of you, Keller." Sam's smile remained steady, though Rose noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "Failed only because Jenkins didn't adapt to changing conditions. I've got different plans for the place." "Indeed." George's tone conveyed his skepticism. "Well, welcome to Silver Reef, though I doubt our paths will cross much. Rose, we should be going. The Hamiltons are expecting us for luncheon." As George led her away, Rose glanced back to see Sam watching them, his expression unreadable. She couldn't explain the small twinge of regret she felt at the abrupt end to their conversation. Over the next few weeks, Rose found herself thinking about Sam Keller more often than she cared to admit. She heard snippets about him from the household staff. He'd hired local men to help repair the ranch buildings, had brought in a small herd of fine horses from Colorado, and was quickly earning respect for his fair dealings and hard work. One afternoon in late July, Rose was in town visiting the dressmaker when a commotion erupted in the street. A team of horses pulling a heavy wagon had been spooked by something and were charging down the main street, the driver thrown from his seat. People scattered, women screaming, men diving for cover. Rose froze on the boardwalk, watching in horror as the runaway team headed straight toward a small boy who had wandered into the street. Suddenly, a blur of movement caught her eye. Sam Keller running into the path of the horses, snatching the child to safety with one arm while grabbing for the leader's bridles with his free hand. The horses reared and bucked, dragging Sam several yards before he managed to slow and finally stop them, his boots digging furrows in the dusty street. The crowd erupted in applause and relieved shouts as he returned the crying boy to his hysterical mother. Rose found herself moving toward him without conscious thought. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood seeping through the fabric. "You're hurt," she said, reaching him as the crowd began to disperse. Sam looked down at his shoulder as if just noticing the injury. "It's nothing. Got caught on a bit of harness is all. It needs cleaning at the very least." Rose made a quick decision. "The doctor's office is just down the street. I'll walk with you." He started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. "I'd appreciate the company, Mrs. Patterson." They walked side by side, Rose acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. The wife of Alderman Patterson escorting the new rancher to the doctor would certainly fuel gossip, but in that moment, she couldn't bring herself to care. At the doctor's office, Sam insisted she needn't wait, but Rose stayed anyway, sitting in the outer room while Doc Wilson cleaned and stitched the gash in Sam's shoulder. When he emerged, his shirt back on but torn and bloodied, she stood. "Thank you for waiting," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "What you did was very brave," she replied. "That boy could have been killed." Sam shrugged his good shoulder. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." She hesitated, then added, "I should be getting back. My husband will be wondering where I am." Sam studied her face for a long moment. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Patterson?" "Yes. Are you happy? With your life, I mean." The question caught her completely off guard, so direct, so personal, and so entirely unlike anything anyone had asked her since her marriage. The automatic response, of course, "Why wouldn't I be?" died on her lips under the genuine concern in his blue eyes. "I have everything I need," she said carefully. He nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." Before she could respond, the doctor's office door opened and several people entered, breaking the moment. Rose took the opportunity to bid Sam goodbye and hurry away, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't name. That night, lying awake in her solitary bed, Rose turned the encounter over in her mind. Am I happy? The question haunted her because she knew the answer. No, she wasn't happy. She was secure, comfortable, provided for, but not happy. Not alive in the way she'd once dreamed of being. For the first time since her wedding day, she allowed herself to weep silently into her pillow. August brought scorching heat and the town's annual Founders' Day celebration. As the alderman's wife, Rose was expected to help organize the ladies' auxiliary contribution, a grand picnic on the town square followed by dancing and fireworks. She threw herself into the preparations, grateful for the distraction from her increasingly troubling thoughts. On the day of the celebration, the entire town gathered in their finest clothes despite the heat. Tables groaned under the weight of food, a band played cheerful tunes, and children ran laughing between the displays of local crafts and produce. George circulated among the prominent citizens, Rose on his arm like an accessory, smiling and nodding as he discussed mining profits and railroad contracts. When the dancing began, he partnered her for one obligatory waltz before returning to his business discussions, leaving her to sit with the other wives at the edge of the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Patterson?" Rose looked up to find Sam Keller standing before her, hand extended, looking unlike his usual self in a clean, dark suit and white shirt. His hair was neatly combed, though one rebellious lock had already fallen across his forehead. She hesitated, glancing toward George, who was deep in conversation with the banker across the square. "It's just a dance," Sam said quietly, following her gaze, "and people will talk more if you refuse than if you accept." He was right, and so she placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor as the band began a lively reel. Unlike George's stiff, formal dancing, Sam moved with natural grace, guiding her through the steps with a firm hand at her waist. "You dance well, Mr. Keller," she said, slightly breathless as they circled each other. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was the mark of a gentleman." His eyes twinkled. "Though I suspect she just wanted to make sure we wouldn't embarrass her at church socials." "You have brothers, too, both back in Colorado, running the family ranch with my father." He spun her under his arm, then caught her hand again. "What about you? Any family besides your mother?" "No," she said, surprised he knew about her mother. "It was just the three of us until my father passed last year." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps. "I heard about your father's farm, tough times." The music ended before she could respond, and Sam returned her to her seat with a formal bow. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Patterson." Rose watched him walk away, joining a group of the local ranch hands and shopkeepers. Several times throughout the evening, she felt his gaze on her from across the square, but he didn't approach her again. As twilight fell and the fireworks began, Rose stood beside George, her face upturned to the explosions of color in the darkening sky. Across the crowd, she caught a glimpse of Sam, his profile illuminated by the bursts of light. As if sensing her, he turned, their eyes meeting for a brief moment before she looked away. That night, Rose dreamed of dancing under open skies, of strong hands and blue eyes, and woke feeling more alone than ever in her elegant, empty bedroom. The opportunity to see Sam again came sooner than Rose expected. 3 days after the Founders' Day celebration, George informed her at breakfast that he needed to travel to Salt Lake City for business. "I'll be gone for at least 10 days, he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Perhaps longer if negotiations with the railroad investors prove fruitful. You'll manage the household as usual in my absence." "Of course," Rose replied, hiding her relief at the prospect of a brief respite from their strained coexistence. After seeing George off on the morning stage, Rose found herself with an unfamiliar sense of freedom. She spent the first day reorganizing her garden, then woke early the next morning with a sudden impulse. Dressing in her simplest day dress, one George rarely allowed her to wear in public, she ordered the carriage brought around. "Where shall I tell Mr. Patterson you've gone if he sends a telegram, madam?" Mrs. Winters asked as Rose gathered her bonnet and gloves. Rose hesitated only briefly. "Tell him I've gone to visit my mother." It wasn't exactly a lie. She intended to stop at the guest house on her way back. An hour later, Rose found herself on the rutted road leading to the Jenkins, now Keller ranch. She told herself she was simply being neighborly, checking on a newcomer to the area as any proper lady might do. The flutter in her stomach as the ranch buildings came into view suggested otherwise. The place already looked different from the abandoned property she remembered. New fencing surrounded the corral, the barn roof had been repaired, and the small ranch house had a fresh coat of whitewash. Several horses grazed in the pasture, magnificent animals that spoke of Sam's expertise as a horseman. As Rose pulled the carriage to a stop in front of the house, the door opened and Sam emerged, surprise evident on his face. He wore a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, approaching the carriage, "this is unexpected." "I was visiting my mother," Rose said, the prepared excuse coming easily. "Her house is just a few miles south. I thought I might stop and see how you're settling in. My father always spoke highly of this property's potential." Sam's slow smile told her he might not fully believe her explanation, but he didn't challenge it. "I'd be honored to show you around if you have time." He helped her down from the carriage, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer sun beating down on them. The next 2 hours were unlike anything Rose had experienced since her marriage. Sam led her through the ranch, showing her the improvements he'd made and explaining his plans with an enthusiasm that was contagious. He introduced her to his prized stallion, a magnificent black horse named Midnight, and laughed when the animal nuzzled her palm looking for treats. "He usually doesn't take to strangers," Sam commented. "He's got good judgment." They ended the tour at the small creek that ran along the edge of the property, sitting in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Sam had brought along a canteen of cool water, which they shared as they watched the horses grazing in the distance. "Why Silver Reef?" Rose asked suddenly. "You said your family has a ranch in Colorado. Why come all this way to start over?" Sam was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. "Needed my own place, I guess. Something that was mine, built with my own hands." He glanced at her. "My father's ranch will go to my older brother. That's just how it is. I could have stayed on as a hand, but you wanted more," Rose finished for him. "Yes," his eyes held hers. "Don't we all want more than what's expected of us?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. "Some of us don't have that luxury," Rose said softly, looking away. "Because of your marriage." It wasn't a question. Rose stiffened. "My marriage is not a topic for discussion, Mr. Keller." "Back to Mr. Keller now," he sighed. "I apologize if I overstepped, but people talk in small towns, Rose." The use of her first name should have offended her. Instead, it sent a thrill through her to hear it in his deep voice. "And what do they say?" she asked, knowing she shouldn't. "They say George Patterson paid off your family's debts in exchange for a young wife to improve his standing in the community. They say he treats you more like property than a partner." Sam's eyes were gentle despite his blunt words. "They say you deserve better." Rose stood abruptly, brushing dust from her skirt. "I should go. This was inappropriate." Sam rose as well, towering over her. "Was it, or was it the first honest conversation you've had in months? You don't know anything about my life." "I know enough to see you're not happy. That day outside the doctor's office, you couldn't even say the words. And what would you have me do? Leave, become destitute, watch my mother lose everything again?" Rose's voice rose with emotion she normally kept carefully contained. "You speak of choices as though they're simple." "They're never simple," Sam said, stepping closer. "But they exist. There are always choices, Rose." She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin. "I made my choice when I said my vows, did you? Or was it made for you?" Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. A young ranch hand came galloping up, pulling his horse to a stop when he spotted them. "Mr. Keller, sorry to interrupt, but that new mare's gone into labor and Jim says there's complications." Sam's demeanor changed instantly. "I'll be right there." He turned to Rose. "I'm sorry I have to go. Can you find your way back to the house?" "Of course," she said, relieved by the interruption yet oddly disappointed. "I should leave anyway." He hesitated, then said, "Will you come again?" "When you can." The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Rose knew the sensible answer, the proper answer. Instead, she heard herself say, "Perhaps." Sam's smile was brief but brilliant. "I'll hold you to that, Mrs. Patterson." With that, he swung up behind his ranch hand on the horse and galloped toward the barn, leaving Rose to walk slowly back to her carriage, her thoughts in turmoil. As she drove home, Rose tried to sort through her conflicted feelings. She had made a commitment to George, regardless of its loveless nature. Her mother's security depended on that commitment. Yet for the first time since her wedding day, she had felt truly alive in Sam's company, seen for herself, not as an alderman's wife or an obligation. She stopped at her mother's small house as planned, finding comfort in the familiar presence even as guilt gnawed at her for the thoughts she couldn't share. By the time she returned to the Patterson house, evening was falling, and Rose had resolved to put the afternoon behind her as a momentary weakness. That resolution lasted precisely 3 days. On the 4th day of George's absence, a package arrived at the house, delivered by one of the Keller ranch hands. Inside, Rose found a small wooden box beautifully carved with wildflowers. A note accompanied it, "Found this in town and thought of you. The craftsman said these boxes are meant to hold treasured memories. I hope you'll find some worth keeping." Rose traced the delicate carvings with her fingertips, a lump forming in her throat. Such a simple gift, yet more thoughtful than anything George had ever given her. She placed it on her bedside table, telling herself she would return it when next she saw Sam. Keeping it would be improper, but she didn't return it. Instead, she found herself opening it each night before sleep, imagining what memories might someday be precious enough to store inside. George's business in Salt Lake City extended beyond the initial 10 days. His telegrams were brief, focused on business matters with perfunctory inquiries about the household. Rose responded with equally brief updates, never mentioning her visit to the Keller ranch or the gift she'd received. 2 weeks into George's absence, Silver Reef was hit by a violent summer storm. Rain pounded the town in sheets, lightning splitting the sky as thunder rattled windows. Rose sat in the parlor with a book she couldn't focus on, watching water stream down the glass panes. A frantic knocking at the front door startled her. She found Mrs. Winters already hurrying to answer it, opening the door to reveal Sam Keller, drenched and breathing hard. "Mr. Keller," Rose exclaimed, coming forward. "What on earth? The creek by your mother's house is flooding," he said without preamble. "The water's already reached her porch. I came as soon as I saw how bad it was getting." Fear gripped Rose. "My mother, she's safe for now, but we need to get her out of there before the water rises further." Sam's eyes were urgent. "I have a wagon outside." Rose didn't hesitate. "Mrs. Winters, please bring my rain cloak." She turned to Sam. "I'm coming with you." Minutes later, they were in Sam's wagon, racing through the downpour toward the small guest house. The normally docile creek had transformed into a raging torrent, water already lapping at the foundation of her mother's home. Eleanor Zimmerman stood on the porch, clutching a small bundle of possessions, her face pale with fear as Sam's wagon approached. "Rose," she called over the storm's roar. The water came up so fast, Sam leapt from the wagon, wading through knee-deep water to reach the porch. "We need to go now, Mrs. Zimmerman. The dam upstream might not hold." He helped Eleanor into the wagon beside Rose, then climbed back up to the driver's seat, urging the team forward through the rising water. Rose held her mother close, both of them shivering despite their cloaks. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "To the Patterson house," Rose began, but Sam shook his head. "The bridge to town is likely underwater by now. The ranch is closer and on higher ground." Rose met his eyes, understanding the implications of what he was suggesting, spending the night at his home, unchaperoned save for her mother and whatever ranch hands might be present. Propriety demanded she object. The ferocity of the storm made such objections foolish. "The ranch, then," she agreed. By the time they reached the Keller ranch, all three were soaked to the skin despite their rain gear. The ranch house glowed with lamplight, a haven in the storm-darkened landscape. Sam helped them inside, where a fire blazed in the hearth of the modest but comfortable main room. "Jim," Sam called, and his foreman appeared from the kitchen. "Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Zimmerman will be staying until the storm passes. Please make up the spare bedroom." "Already done, boss," the older man said. "Saw you heading toward the creek and figured you might be bringing folks back." Sam turned to Rose and Eleanor. "Let me find you some dry clothes. They won't be fancy, but they'll be warm." Soon Rose found herself in a man's flannel shirt and trousers rolled up at the ankles, her wet hair loose down her back, sitting before the fire while her mother, similarly attired, dozed in a rocking chair nearby. Sam, also in dry clothes, brought them mugs of hot coffee laced with whiskey. "For medicinal purposes," he said with a small smile, handing Rose a mug, "to ward off chills." "Thank you," she said, their fingers brushing during the exchange, "for everything. If you hadn't come—" "I was worried," he admitted, settling into a chair beside her. "I've been keeping an eye on your mother's place since you visited. When the storm hit, I knew that creek would be trouble." The simple statement, "I was worried," warmed Rose more than the fire or the spiked coffee. When was the last time someone had worried about her, or those she loved? "You're a good man, Sam Keller," she said softly. He looked into the fire. "I try to be." After a moment, he added, "Your mother seems like a remarkable woman." Rose glanced at Eleanor's sleeping form. "She is. She's endured so much, losing my father, the farm, and then—" She stopped, unwilling to speak of the arrangement that had led to her marriage. "And then watching her daughter sacrifice herself," Sam finished quietly. Rose didn't deny it this time. She never asked me to do it, but I couldn't bear to see her lose everything after she'd already lost so much. And what about what you lost? Sam's voice was gentle, his eyes searching her face in the firelight. Rose looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring that felt like a shackle. I was never under any illusions about my marriage. George was clear about his expectations. And what were those? Sam asked, though she suspected he already knew. A respectable wife to manage his household, a young face to improve his standing in society, an ornament, not a partner. The bitterness she usually kept carefully contained seeped into her voice. He has never, we don't. She faltered, unable to speak of the physical aspect of her marriage, or rather the lack thereof. Understanding dawned in Sam's eyes. He doesn't touch you. Rose felt heat flood her cheeks. That is hardly an appropriate topic. No, it's not, Sam agreed, but it matters, Rose. A marriage without affection isn't a marriage at all. It's a contract, she whispered. One I'm bound to honor. Sam leaned forward, his voice low and intense. A contract signed under duress to save your mother from ruin. A contract that benefits only him while you wither away in that mausoleum of a house. He reached for her hand, his warm fingers covering hers. You deserve to be cherished, not possessed. Rose's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should pull her hand away, end this dangerous conversation. Instead, she found herself turning her palm up, her fingers intertwining with his. Sam, she whispered, his name a question and warning all at once. The crack of a log in the fire startled them both. Rose pulled her hand away as Alina stirred in the rocking chair, blinking awake. The storm. Her mother asked, disoriented. Still raging, Sam said, rising smoothly. But you're safe here, Mrs. Zimmerman. Why don't I show you both to your room? You must be exhausted. The moment broken, Rose followed Sam and her mother down a short hallway to a small but clean bedroom with a large bed. Sam bid them good night at the door, his eyes lingering on Rose's face before he turned away. Lying beside her mother in the darkness, listening to the rain pound the roof, Rose felt a turmoil inside that matched the storm outside. For the first time in her life, she was contemplating the unthinkable, breaking a vow, dishonoring a commitment, following her heart instead of her duty. The storm cleared by morning, leaving behind a washed, clean world and rising floodwaters that had cut off access to town. Sam rode out at dawn to check the roads, returning with news that the bridge remained underwater. It'll be at least another day before it's passable, he reported as they sat at breakfast. I've sent Jim to notify the sheriff that you're both safe here, so no one will worry. Alina seemed content with the situation, charmed by Sam's courtesy and the rustic comfort of the ranch. After breakfast, she discovered Sam's small collection of books and settled in the main room to read. Rose found herself restless, unwilling to sit idle with her thoughts. When Sam mentioned he needed to check on the horses in the south pasture, she impulsively asked to accompany him. The ground will be muddy, he warned. I'm already wearing borrowed clothes, she pointed out, gesturing at the trousers she still wore. I can hardly ruin them more than I already have, he grinned, the expression transforming his face. Fair enough. They rode out together, Rose on a gentle mare Sam assured her was suitable for an inexperienced rider. The air was fresh and clean after the storm, wildflowers already perking up in the morning sunlight. Rose felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years, riding beside Sam across the open land. They found the horses gathered near a stand of cottonwoods, seemingly unbothered by the previous night's tempest. While Sam checked them for injuries, Rose wandered to the edge of the creek that bordered the pasture, watching the still swollen waters rush past. Careful there, Sam called, joining her. The bank might not be stable after all that rain. It's beautiful, she said, gazing at the landscape around them. Wild but beautiful. Like you, Sam said quietly. Rose turned to face him, startled by the naked emotion in his voice. I'm not wild, she protested weakly. Aren't you, under all those proper dresses and polite smiles? He stepped closer. I see it in your eyes, Rose, the wildness, the life you're holding back. She should step away, she knew she should. Instead, she stood her ground as he moved closer still. I can't be what you want me to be, Sam. I don't want you to be anything but yourself. His hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingertips gentle against her skin. The self you were meant to be, not the one Patterson purchased. Rose closed her eyes, torn between leaning into his touch and pulling away. He'll be back soon. I have obligations, responsibilities. To a man who sees you as property, who doesn't love you, doesn't touch you, doesn't care what's in your heart. Sam's voice was low, urgent. That's not a marriage, Rose, it's a prison. And what would you offer instead? She asked, opening her eyes to search his face. Ruin, scandal, the loss of everything my mother has left. I'd offer love, he said simply. Inconvenient, imperfect, but real. I'd offer a life where you're a partner, not a possession, where your thoughts and dreams matter. His thumb traced her lower lip. Where you're cherished in every way a woman should be. The truth of his words resonated in her heart, unleashing emotions she'd locked away for too long. With a small sound that was half sob, half surrender, Rose leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Sam's response was immediate and overwhelming. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest as his mouth moved over hers with a gentle hunger that made her knees weak. It was her first real kiss. George's perfunctory pecks had been nothing like this all-consuming connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rose felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her, a key turning in a lock too long sealed. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, though she made no move to step from the circle of his arms. Then why did you? Sam's eyes held hers, refusing to let her hide. Because I wanted to know what it felt like, she admitted. To be wanted, to be cherished, and now you know. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. There's no going back from that knowledge, Rose. She knew he was right. That kiss had changed, everything had shown her what she was missing, what she had never had with George and never would. I don't know what to do, she confessed, the admission costing her pride but necessary. I made a vow, under duress, to save your mother. Sam's hands moved to her shoulders. Would she want you to sacrifice your entire life for her security? The question struck Rose like a physical blow. No, she said after a moment. She wouldn't, but that doesn't change what I promised. Talk to her, Sam urged. Before you decide anything, talk to your mother. Rose nodded slowly. I will. They rode back to the ranch house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The kiss hung between them, both a promise and a complication. Zimmerman proved more perceptive than Rose had given her credit for. That evening, after Sam had excused himself to tend to the evening chores, mother and daughter sat alone by the fire. He's in love with you, said without preamble, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you have feelings for him as well. Rose stared at her mother in shock. It's not, don't insult my intelligence, Rose. Elinor's voice was gentle despite the stern words. I've seen how you look at each other. I saw it at breakfast, and I see it even more clearly now. Rose's shoulders slumped. It doesn't matter what I feel, I'm married to George. Ah yes, George Patterson. Elinor's mouth tightened. The man who bought my daughter to settle our debts and improve his social standing. Mother, am I wrong? Elinor challenged. I've regretted accepting his arrangement from the moment you walked down that aisle looking like you were marching to your execution. But you insisted it was your choice. It was, Rose said. I couldn't let you lose everything, and I couldn't bear watching you sacrifice your chance at happiness. Elinor took Rose's hands in hers. I'm an old woman, Rose. I don't need a fine guest house or new dresses. I need to know my daughter isn't condemning herself to a lifetime of loneliness to keep me comfortable. Tears filled Rose's eyes. What would you have me do? Leave George, create a scandal that would destroy both our reputations. I would have you find happiness, Elinor said simply. Whatever form that takes. Rose looked into the fire, torn between the path of duty she'd committed to and the unexpected fork that had appeared in the form of a blue-eyed cowboy who saw the woman she truly was beneath the proper wife she pretended to be. I don't know if I'm brave enough, she whispered. Elinor squeezed her hands. You are your father's daughter. Brave is in your blood. The floodwaters receded overnight, and by mid-morning Sam reported that the bridge to town was passable again. The time had come to return to reality. As Sam helped Elinor into the wagon, Rose lingered on the porch, torn between relief and regret that their interlude was ending. I meant what I said yesterday, Sam told her quietly. All of it. I know, she replied. I need time, Sam. To think, to decide what I can live with and what I can't live without, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll be here, whatever you decide. The ride to town was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Sam took them directly to the Patterson house, helping Alina down first before turning to assist Rose. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist. Remember what real feels like, he murmured for her ears only. Before she could respond, the front door opened and George Patterson appeared on the porch, his expression thunderous. Rose, he said coldly. I returned early to find my house empty and my wife apparently spending the night with a rancher. Rose's stomach dropped, but she kept her composure as she walked toward the house. The storm flooded Mother's house, George. Mr. Keller was kind enough to offer us shelter when the bridge washed out. The sheriff was notified. George's eyes flicked to Sam, who had remained by the wagon, then to Alina. Mrs. Zimmerman, I'm sure you must be tired. Please go inside. Mrs. Winters will attend to you. Once Alina had reluctantly gone inside, George turned his attention back to Rose. We will discuss this matter privately. There's nothing to discuss, Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. We were caught in a dangerous situation and accepted the only safe option available, in men's clothing. George's eyes raked over her borrowed attire with distaste. Go inside and change into something appropriate. We have appearances to maintain. Rose felt a flare of defiance but swallowed it. This was not the time or place. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Keller, she said formally. Sam tipped his hat, his expression carefully neutral though his eyes conveyed much more. Madam, Mr. Patterson. With that, he climbed back into his wagon and drove away. Inside the house, George waited until they were alone in his study before speaking, his voice tight with controlled anger. Do you have any idea what people are saying? The alderman's wife spending the night at a bachelor's ranch, wearing men's clothing. As I explained, it was an emergency situation, Rose replied calmly. Would you have preferred I let my mother drown? I would have preferred you maintain some semblance of propriety. George paced the study. Keller is not the sort of man a woman in your position associates with. He's a cowboy, Rose, with no standing in this community. He saved my mother's life, Rose said, her own anger rising. And mine. That earns him my gratitude, regardless of his standing. George stopped pacing, studying her with narrowed eyes. There's something different about you. Rose met his gaze steadily. Perhaps there is. Whatever notions Keller may have put in your head, I suggest you forget them immediately. George's voice was cold. You are my wife. You have certain obligations, certain standards to maintain. And what of your obligations as a husband, George? The words escaped before Rose could stop them. His eyebrows rose. I have provided you with every comfort, every luxury. Your mother lives in security because of my generosity. What more could you possibly want? 1,000 answers crowded her mind. Affection, partnership, passion, love, all the things she now knew were possible because Sam had shown her. Perhaps we should discuss this another time, she said instead, unwilling to have this confrontation while her emotions were still raw. I'm tired from our ordeal. George seemed relieved by her retreat. Yes, that would be best. Go rest, then change for dinner. The Williamsons are joining us at 7. I expect you to be your usual charming self. Rose nodded and left the study, climbing the stairs to her bedroom with a heavy heart. As she closed the door behind her, she caught sight of the small wooden box Sam had given her, sitting on her bedside table. She opened it, running her fingers over the smooth interior, remembering his words. These boxes are meant to hold treasured memories. She had a memory to treasure now, the feel of his lips on hers, the warmth of his arms around her, the knowledge that a different kind of life was possible. For the first time since her wedding day, Rose allowed herself to imagine a future not bound by her current circumstances. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly uncertain, but it was also real. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, Rose resumed her duties as Mrs. Patterson, hosting dinners, attending church, managing the household with quiet efficiency. George, seemingly satisfied that the scandal of her night at the Keller ranch had been contained, returned to his usual pattern of polite disinterest in her daily life. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Rose found herself going through the motions of her life while her mind constantly returned to Sam, to their conversations, to the kiss they had shared, to the possibilities he represented. She visited her mother frequently at the guest house, which had sustained only minor damage from the flood. Eleanor never pushed, but her knowing eyes told Rose she understood the battle raging within her daughter's heart. Rose avoided town as much as possible, both yearning to see Sam and dreading the complications his presence would bring. But Silver Reef was too small a community for their paths not to cross eventually. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Rose was leaving the milliner's shop when she nearly collided with Sam on the boardwalk. He steadied her with a hand at her elbow, the brief contact sending a jolt of awareness through her even as she stepped back quickly. "Mrs. Patterson," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed much more. "Mr. Keller." She was painfully aware of curious gazes from passers-by. "How are you getting by?" His voice softened. "And you, are you well?" The double meaning wasn't lost on her. "Are you well? Are you happy? Have you decided?" "I am managing," she replied carefully. Sam glanced around at the busy street, then lowered his voice. "Could you meet me, just to talk? The ridge above the North Creek tomorrow at noon." She should refuse. The proper Mrs. Patterson would never consider such an improper meeting. But Rose was no longer sure she wanted to be the proper Mrs. Patterson. "I'll try," she whispered, then moved past him before anyone could notice their hushed exchange. The next day, Rose told Mrs. Winters she was going to visit her mother, but instead turned her carriage toward the North Creek. The ridge Sam had mentioned overlooked much of Silver Reef Valley, a secluded spot well away from the usual travel routes. He was already waiting when she arrived, sitting on a large flat rock, his horse grazing nearby. He stood as she approached, hat in hand, eyes drinking in the sight of her as though it had been years rather than weeks since they'd last spoken. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said as she tied her horse beside his. "Neither was I," she admitted, joining him on the rock. For a moment they sat in silence, gazing out at the valley spread below them, the town, the mines in the distance, the scattered ranches and farms. "I've missed you," Sam said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Rose closed her eyes briefly. "I've missed you too, more than I should." "Have you thought about what I said, about what you truly want?" "I've thought of little else." She turned to face him. "But it's not simple, Sam. I made vows. I have responsibilities." "To a man who sees you as property," Sam said, an edge creeping into his voice. "Who parades you around town like a prize he won, but doesn't appreciate the treasure he has." "He fulfilled his end of our arrangement," Rose felt compelled to point out. "My mother is provided for, our debts are paid, and that's enough. To spend your life as a decorative object, never loved, never truly seen." Sam took her hand, his grip gentle but insistent. "You know there's more now, Rose. You've felt it between us." She didn't pull her hand away. "Yes," she whispered. "I have." "Then leave him," Sam urged. "Not for me, though. God knows I want you by my side, but for yourself, for the life you deserve." "And become what? A fallen woman, the subject of gossip and scorn?" Fear colored her voice. "What of my mother?" "Your mother wants your happiness," Sam reminded her. "She told you as much." "And what of you?" Rose asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted her. "What would you risk for this? Feeling between us?" "Everything," he said without hesitation. "My reputation, my standing in the community, though neither means much compared to you. I'd leave Silver Reef altogether if that's what it took to give us a chance at happiness." The absolute certainty in his voice shook her. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you're brave and loyal and kind. I know you sacrifice your own happiness for those you love. I know when you smile, really smile, not that polite mask you wear in town. It lights up everything around you." His hand tightened on hers. "I know I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I never will again." Tears welled in Rose's eyes. "Sam, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "But know this, whatever you decide, however long it takes, I'll be waiting. I'm not giving up on us, Rose." The conviction in his voice, in his eyes, cracked something open inside her. Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her confused longing and newfound courage into the contact. Sam responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her, holding her close as though afraid she might vanish. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day you collided with me outside the mercantile." The words, spoken so plainly, so honestly, pierced Rose to her core. No one had ever said those words to her, not George, certainly, but not any suitor before him either. Love had never been part of the equation in her life's calculations. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything." Sam brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Just promise you'll think about what your heart truly wants." "I promise," she whispered. They parted reluctantly, agreeing to be careful about future meetings. As Rose drove back toward town, her mind whirled with possibilities and fears. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly contemplate leaving George, seeking a divorce or annulment, facing the scandal and gossip, building a new life with Sam. The very thought was terrifying. And yet, the alternative, returning to her empty existence as Mrs. Patterson, knowing what real love felt like but never experiencing it again, seemed suddenly unbearable. Rose didn't go directly home. Instead, she drove to her mother's house, needing counsel from the one person who truly knew her heart. Eleanor took one look at her daughter's face and understood. "You've seen him again." Rose nodded, sinking into a chair at the small kitchen table. "He loves me, Mother." "I know," Eleanor said gently. "The question is, do you love him?" "I." Rose hesitated, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. "I think I do, or I could if I allowed myself." "And George?" "Do you love your husband?" "No," Rose admitted, the truth she had never spoken aloud finally emerging. "I never have. He doesn't love me either. Our marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then you have a difficult decision to make. What would Father say?" Rose asked, her voice small. "About breaking a sacred vow. Your father would say that vows made under duress without love are chains, not commitments." Eleanor covered her daughter's hand with her own. "He would want you to be happy, Rose, as do I, even if it means scandal, gossip. Perhaps having to leave Silver Reef altogether. Even then." Eleanor's voice was firm. "I've lived long enough to know that other people's opinions matter far less than your own peace of heart." Rose left her mother's house with much to consider. By the time she returned to the Patterson mansion, she had made her decision. George was in his study when she arrived, reviewing mining reports as was his custom in the late afternoon. He looked up with mild surprise when she entered without knocking. "Rose, is something the matter?" She closed the door behind her and stood before his desk, hands clasped to hide their trembling. "We need to talk, George." He set down his papers, frowning at her serious tone. "What about our marriage?" Rose took a deep breath. "I want it annulled." The shock on his face would have been comical under different circumstances. "I beg your pardon, you heard me." Now that she had begun, Rose found strength flowing into her voice. "Our marriage has never been a true union. It was a business arrangement, a contract, we both know that." George stared at her for a long moment, then laughed without humor. "This is about Keller, isn't it? He's filled your head with romantic nonsense." "This is about me," Rose countered. "About the fact that I'm 22 years old and facing a lifetime of empty days in a loveless marriage. Yes, I have feelings for Sam, but even if he didn't exist, what we have isn't a marriage, George. It's a transaction." George's expression hardened. "A transaction you agreed to, my dear, one that saved your mother from destitution and your family name from disgrace." "And I'm grateful for that," Rose acknowledged. "But I can't continue living this way, not now that I know there's more." "More?" George stood, his voice rising. "What more could you possibly want? You have a position in society, a beautiful home, financial security, love," Rose interrupted. "Partnership, a real marriage with a man who sees me as more than an ornament or an obligation." George's face flushed with anger. "And you think a cowboy can give you that? A man with nothing but a run-down ranch and a few horses to his name?" "He has more than that," Rose said quietly. "He has integrity. And yes, he can give me what I need because he already sees me the real me, not just the proper wife you purchased." "I will not grant you an annulment," George declared, his voice cold. "The scandal would ruin my standing in the community. Besides, you have no grounds." "Don't I?" Rose met his gaze steadily. "We have never consummated this marriage, George, not once in nearly a year. That is grounds enough in any court." The color drained from George's face. The fact of their unconsummated union was his secret shame, one he had never expected her to use against him. "You wouldn't dare bring such a private matter into public view," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I would prefer not to," Rose agreed. "Which is why I'm hoping we can come to an arrangement privately, one that preserves your dignity and gives me my freedom." George sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." He was silent for a long moment, calculating. George Patterson had always been a pragmatic man, which was partly why he had sought a marriage of convenience rather than love in the first place. "And if I refuse," he asked finally, "then I will petition the court for an annulment on grounds of non-consummation," Rose said, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "I will move to my mother's house today and begin proceedings immediately." The threat hung in the air between them. George stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, this quiet woman he had brought into his home but never truly known, now standing before him with unexpected steel in her spine. "You've changed," he said at last. "No," Rose replied. "I've remembered who I was always meant to be." 3 weeks later, Rose stood on the porch of her mother's small guest house, watching a familiar wagon approach along the dusty road. Her heart leapt at the sight of Sam driving the team, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. The negotiations with George had been surprisingly civilized once he'd accepted the inevitability of their separation. The community had been told that Mrs. Patterson was returning to her mother's home due to Alina's declining health, a fiction that allowed George to save face while the legal details of their annulment were quietly arranged. There had been whispers, of course, sidelong glances in church, conversations that abruptly ceased when Rose entered the mercantile. But she found she cared less about such things than she had expected. The freedom of honesty, of following her heart for the first time in her life, made the weight of gossip seem insignificant in comparison. Sam reined the wagon to a stop before the house, his face breaking into a smile that still made her breath catch. They had been careful in public, maintaining a respectful distance until her situation with George was resolved. Their few private meetings had been brief, constrained by propriety and the delicate nature of her circumstances. But today was different. Today, Rose held in her reticule the official document declaring her marriage to George Patterson null and void, as though it had never existed. "Good afternoon, Miss Zimmerman," Sam called as he jumped down from the wagon, emphasizing her return to her maiden name. "Mr. Keller," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face as she walked down the steps to meet him. He stopped before her, hat in hand, eyes drinking in the sight of her. "I heard the papers came through yesterday." "They did," she confirmed. "It's done." The relief and joy in his expression mirrored her own feelings. "Then I have a question for you, Rose Zimmerman. One I've been waiting to ask for what feels like forever." Her heart skipped. "Yes. Would you do me the honor of taking a ride with me this afternoon? There's something at the ranch I'd like to show you." It wasn't the question she had half expected, but Rose found herself charmed by his restraint, his determination to court her properly now that she was free to be courted. "I would like that very much," she said, taking his offered hand as he helped her into the wagon. The familiar route to the Keller ranch seemed transformed, somehow brighter, full of possibility rather than forbidden longing. Sam told her about his latest acquisitions, a pair of promising foals and a new breeding mare from Colorado, his enthusiasm infectious as he described his plans for expanding the herd. When they arrived at the ranch, Rose noticed changes since her last visit. The house had a fresh coat of paint, the garden beside it had been expanded and planted with vegetables and flowers, and a new corral had been built beside the barn. "You've been busy," she commented as he helped her down from the wagon. "I've had motivation to improve the place," Sam replied with a meaningful look that made her blush. He led her not toward the house but down a path that wound behind the barn toward a small rise. As they crested the hill, Rose gasped at what awaited them. A massive old cottonwood tree spread its branches over a patch of lush grass. Beneath it, a small cabin stood newly built, its pine logs gleaming golden in the afternoon sunlight, a porch wrapping around two sides, windows with actual glass panes reflecting the blue sky. "Sam," she breathed. "What is this?" He took her hand, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness she found endearing. "My father taught me to build before he taught me to ride. I've been working on it since the flood, every spare moment between ranch chores." He hesitated. "It's for you, Rose, if you want it." Tears sprang to her eyes as she understood the magnitude of what he was offering, not just a home, but a future he had built with his own hands, plank by plank, nail by nail, while waiting for her to find her way to freedom. "Can I see inside?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Sam led her up the porch steps and opened the door, revealing a cozy interior with a stone fireplace, handcrafted furniture, and colorful curtains at the windows. "Mrs. Jenkins from town helped with the curtains and linens," he explained as Rose wandered through the main room into a small bedroom with a beautifully carved bed frame. "And I ordered the cook stove from Salt Lake City. It arrived just last week." Rose ran her hand over the smooth surface of a table by the window, marveling at the craftsmanship. "You made all this furniture yourself." "Most of it," Sam admitted. "My mother would say it's not as fine as store-bought, but it's perfect," Rose interrupted, turning to face him with tears in her eyes. "All of it is perfect, Sam." He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "I need to ask you properly now, Rose Zimmerman, I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment you ran into me outside the mercantile. I want to build a life with you, one where you're never an ornament or an obligation, but a partner in everything." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me?" Rose felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and unrestrained. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, Samuel Keller, I will marry you." His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that made her cling to him, her heart racing with the knowledge that this man, this love, was finally, rightfully hers. When they broke apart, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you back to your mother's now," he said reluctantly. "Before I forget all my good intentions about courting you properly." Rose laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "There will be time enough for propriety. We have our whole lives ahead of us." "That we do," he agreed, his eyes shining with promises of all that was to come. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the small church in Silver Reef. Unlike her first wedding, this one was filled with genuine joy, friends from town who had supported her decision, ranch hands from Sam's property, her mother beaming in the front pew. Rose wore a dress of pale blue rather than white, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Sam stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with a depth of meaning Rose had never imagined possible during her first hollow ceremony. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss left no doubt in anyone's mind that this was a union of love, not convenience. George Patterson did not attend, having left for an extended business trip to San Francisco soon after the annulment was finalized. Rose had sent him an invitation nonetheless, a final peace offering that she knew he wouldn't accept but felt compelled to extend. The celebration afterwards was held at the Keller Ranch, their ranch now, with tables set up under the cottonwood tree and lanterns strung between the branches. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and as twilight fell, Sam led his bride to the small cabin he had built for her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," he said softly, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. That night, Rose discovered all that she had been missing in her first marriage: the tenderness of true intimacy, the passion of mutual desire, the profound connection of two people truly becoming one. Sam's touch awakened feelings she had never known existed, his whispered words of love healing wounds she hadn't realized she carried. In the quiet aftermath, lying in his arms as moonlight streamed through the cabin windows, Rose felt a sense of rightness, of completion that she had never imagined possible. "Happy?" Sam asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I knew was possible," she murmured, tracing patterns on his chest. "I never thought I could have this." "This is only the beginning," he promised, drawing her closer. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." As autumn gave way to winter, Rose and Sam settled into a rhythm of life on the ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from the empty social obligations that had filled her days as Mrs. Patterson. She learned to help with the horses, discovered she had a talent for gardening, and set up a small schoolroom in the main ranch house where she began teaching the children of nearby farms and the ranch hands' families. Eleanor moved into the main house with them, her health improving with the fresh air and purposeful activity. She took over much of the cooking, delighting in feeding the ranch hands and teaching Rose family recipes she had never had the chance to pass down before. Sam's breeding program began to show promise, with several of his colts selling for good prices at the regional horse auction. The ranch prospered under their joint care, each bringing different strengths to their partnership. In town, the scandal of Rose's annulment and remarriage faded as people witnessed the obvious happiness and prosperity of the Keller ranch. Even those who had initially judged her harshly found it difficult to maintain their disapproval in the face of such evident rightness. George Patterson returned from San Francisco with a new wife of his own, a wealthy widow closer to his age, who seemed far more suited to the role of alderman's wife than Rose had ever been. When they passed on the street, George gave a stiff nod of acknowledgement, his new wife oblivious to the history between them. Rose returned the gesture with a serene smile, any lingering guilt or uncertainty long since resolved. Spring brought the most joyous news of all. As the wildflowers bloomed across the rangeland, Rose confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was with child. When she told Sam, his face transformed with wonder and joy. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while Eleanor looked on with tears of happiness. "A child," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our child. Due in late autumn," Rose confirmed, laughing at his exuberance, "just in time for our first anniversary." That night, as they lay together in the bed Sam had crafted with his own hands, his palm resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from trapped wife to beloved partner, from emptiness to abundance. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how close I came to never knowing this happiness," she admitted. "If you hadn't come to Silver Reef, if we hadn't literally collided that day, I believe we would have found each other somehow," Sam said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Rose, even when they're inconvenient," she teased, remembering his words from so long ago, especially then. He kissed her softly. "The best things in life rarely come easily, but they're always worth fighting for." As Rose drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, their child growing between them, she knew without doubt that he was right. Her journey from a marriage of convenience to a love worth risking everything for had taught her the most valuable lesson of all: that true happiness often arrived in unexpected, inconvenient packages, requiring courage to embrace, but offering rewards beyond imagination. In the years that followed, the Keller Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine horses and warm hospitality. Rose and Sam welcomed 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter who inherited her mother's spirit and her father's blue eyes. Eleanor lived to see all 3 grandchildren grow into young adulthood, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, surrounded by the family that had flourished because of one woman's courage to choose love over duty. And on warm summer evenings, long after their hair had begun to silver, Rose and Sam could still be found sitting together on the porch of the cabin he had built for her, hands intertwined, watching the sunset paint the Utah sky in colors as vibrant as the love they had fought for and won so many years before.